By 1864, Grant has been promoted by Lincoln to the general of all Union armies. Grant and Lincoln have finally come to an understanding, which is simply that Grant doesn't have to outgeneral or outthink or outmaneuver Lee. He can just simply constantly engage him in battle, and if Grant loses 10 men to every one that Lee loses, Grant will still win. They're going to win what's called a war of attrition, or that is to say, Grant is going to bleed the South to death. And this is Grant and Lincoln's. Don't worry too much about these maps. If you're interested in this stuff and you want to pause and check them out, that's great. Now, Sherman will be waging war in the East, and he'll destroy Joseph D. Johnston's army in Atlanta. There's 115,000. Which is going to have major consequences for the war. In fact, it is this victory that propels Lincoln to his victory in the 1864 election. Back in the East, Grant is in charge of an army of 115,000 Union soldiers, while Lee is down to 75,000 Confederate soldiers. And Lee will just attack over and over and over again. I'm just going to run through a bunch of these real quickly. The Wilderness, May 5th through May 7th. Spotsylvania Courthouse, May 8th through the 21st. Cold Harbor, June 1st through the 3rd. Notice these battles are all very close to each other. And they are this strategy of just constantly attacking. Grant will try for the railroad at Petersburg, which supplies the capital of Richmond, but Lee will get there first. And Lee will be stuck. Lee will be trapped protecting the railroad at Petersburg, which will effectively end Lee's ability to wage effective war because he no longer can maneuver. Meanwhile, in Georgia, 90,000 U.S. soldiers are facing 60,000 Confederate soldiers, and Joseph E. Johnston is just simply running away from William Tecumseh Sherman's army. Johnston actually wins the only battle fought in this campaign at Kennesaw Mountain, but he's replaced with Hood because he won't fight. Sherman will burn Atlanta. Sherman has decided that the only way to get the South to surrender is to make their life hell. War is hell, he says, and the South must understand it as hell. And this is interesting because, remember, the Northern argument is that this is still part of the United States, yet they begin basically waging a war on civilians, not killing civilians, but taking their property, destroying their homes, destroying their fields. Hood will try to pull Sherman off of Atlanta by threatening to invade the North, but Sherman catches up with him at Nashville and smashes Hood's army on December 15th to the 16th. Then Sherman will turn and he'll march to the sea. This is from Atlanta to Savannah, Georgia, and then he'll turn and head south into South Carolina, north into South Carolina, who of course they blame for the war all along. Now, Sherman will burn and destroy everything in his path for an area miles wide from Atlanta to Savannah and then up the Atlantic coast. And this will be remembered bitterly by Southerners for generations. By April of 1865, Lee informs Jefferson Davis that his army is no longer capable of offering resistance. Whites flee Richmond, Virginia, and Lincoln actually comes with the army to take Richmond. Lee takes 25,000 soldiers and moves up to meet with Johnston, General Johnston, the Southern general, and he realizes it's futile, that it's over. And so he offers to surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. And on April 9th, 1865, Lee will meet in, as we mentioned before, the guy whose yard it started in his front parlor, to sign the surrender papers. 9 days later, Johnston will surrender. This, by the way, that's the picture of it, but that's all replica furniture because the Union officers who were in the room at the time of the surrender took everything in this man's house as a souvenir. Although, to be fair, they did throw some cash on the ground, although apparently it wasn't enough to cover the cost, including George Armstrong Custer, who we'll talk about later. But we have to ask, what if the South had never seceded? What if they had been able to patch up their differences? Slavery would have remained in the South for a while. It definitely would have gone away eventually. I mean, look around the world today. It's gone today. And we're the only country that had to have a war to do that. States' rights wouldn't have been squashed. The idea that the federal government was absolutely supreme and state governments were relatively ineffectual, that idea may not have been established. The Southern economy wouldn't have been destroyed. We're going to look at the devastation to the South in the next chapter. The Republicans probably wouldn't have dominated politics over the next 50 years as they did, or 60 years. But then we also might not have a 13th, 14th, or 15th Amendment freeing the slaves and guaranteeing citizenship and equal treatment by all. Europe perhaps doesn't turn to Egypt and India for its cotton, and maybe continues to buy southern cotton in large quantities. Ultimately, the Civil War destroyed the South. It was a bad decision by the South, and appropriately enough, I guess, it's going to be the South that faces the bulk of the major consequences.